Hi, my name is Atilla Yesilada. You may recall me from my tiny YouTube channel called Real Turkey Channel. Some of you might have noticed that I've been absent over the few weeks. This is not because I have given up on my favorite hobby of dropping videos for Real Turkey Channel, which very few people watch, but because of minor health ailments such as muscle injuries. You sit on your ass quite a bit if you start doing CrossFit at the age of 65. And if you, as I, have been covering Turkish politics and economy, you have a lot of psychiatric problems. This time it was a devastating migraine crisis. I managed to conduct my daily affairs because most of my YouTube videos are sponsored. This is a hint to sponsors, even though no one watches. Hey, Real Turkey Channel will accept any sponsors, including those who do human trafficking. Oh, I shouldn't say these things. YouTube immediately demonetizes, including those who trade for their transactions in Bitcoin. Okay, so much for joking. Let's get back to the subject. My last video covered my predictions for Turkish economy in 2025. This is a follow-up. It's my predictions for Turkish politics in 2025, titled War at Home, Peace Abroad. This is a pun on the famous mantra of Turkey's founding father, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, who said, peace at home, peace at world. In Turkey, it's completely different. First, I'm going to cover domestic developments, which is a very convoluted story. But the main takeaway from this video for the audience is that Turkish politics is driven by President Erdogan's desire to regain eligibility for a third term. Currently, according to the constitution, he is a lame duck who is forced to retire in the next scheduled elections on May 2028. Of course, laws have always loopholes. There are two for Erdogan, and I will try to explain his efforts to regain eligibility and the chances of success for that. Second takeaway, no chances. At the end, he will have to call early elections in the first quarter of 2026. The diplomatic agenda is extremely crowded and very busy. Until Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, I apologize to my Arabic audience if my pronunciation butchered their beautiful language, took over the Assad regime. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is a close associate of Turkey. Thus, guiding Hayat Tahrir al-Sham through the intricacies of international diplomacy and helping it stabilize Syria, the country where roughly 30% of the territory is not controlled by the said organization, and to get rid of or eliminate the Syrian Kurdish political military entity, PYD-YPG, nowadays called Syrian Democratic Forces, has become Turkey's primary political objective. One of the reasons for that is because if the said Syrian Kurdish entity disappears one way or other, hopefully peacefully, this will feed back positively to the domestic political progresses, in particular to Erdogan's efforts of convening a new parliamentary caucus to negotiate on a new constitution, which automatically grants the incumbent a new term. As I've said, a lot of issues, but the second priority is to get along with Trump, which is no different than anyone else on this planet. Perhaps China and India, who are going to show him the middle finger. But Turkey is a middling regional power, and United States has its nose or hands in a lot of issues, like the Ukraine war, like the war in the Middle East. Uh, it supports Syrian Kurds and has 2,000 soldiers in Syria. Turkey has a lot of expectations from Trump. So, uh, Erdogan's first priority is to get along with Trump, and I am going to tell you how he's going to go about it, whether it's possible, and in case the existing friendship between Erdogan and Trump continue, are there any possible upsides to Turkish politics or economy? At the end, I want to say a few words on Turkish markets, in particular the Turkish equity market. And since I promised a very long time ago a video on Turkey's real estate market, I shall also tell you briefly my opinions. So, get your popcorn and sodas or whatever you're doing on your couch on this Sunday night, which probably will be Tuesday by the time this is broadcast, to watch a lengthy video. Starting home, this is more like magazine. There is a huge witch hunt initiated by Erdogan. Turkey is known for witch hunts. Since Gezi uprisings in 2012, we had like a dozen of them. This time is really absurd. I mean, because it covers all political stripes, even those who have no connection to politics. The zenith of absurdity was the probe about the ideological affiliation and possible terror contacts of an actress who 7 years ago, who in France portrayed a PKK militant. Honestly, this is not a joke. Google search it. Also arrested is the chairman of one of the smaller parties in the Grand Assembly called Zafer Party, meaning victory, who is known for its anti-immigrant views. More importantly, there is a new lawsuit against CHP's Istanbul mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, who is also considered to be the main rival to Erdogan if the former ever manages to regain his eligibility in the next presidential elections. Currently, there's an indictment on him charging him for intervening with the official duties of a state servant, which carries a prison term of up to 7 years, as well as a ban from politics, which I'm sure it's just a coincidence, would eliminate him from the presidential race. Also, about 100 journalists are arrested, but hell, I mean, they're always on the wanted list, and we have so many of them, it doesn't make a difference. I mentioned this because if you watch Turkey, a lot of strategists or experts will tell you there's this overarching team behind this witch hunt with a very clever design to divide up the opposition uh, and to gain new advantages for Erdogan in the next presidential age. I don't believe in that. I don't think Erdogan or his team have the sophistication to devise such multi-step and extremely convoluted game theory plays. I think the fact is Erdogan is extremely unpopular right now. His AKP party is only scoring 30%, according to my average of the polls published in the last 3 months, at par with main opposition party CHP. His nationalist ally, Mr. Bahçeli of MHP, garners about 8%. So the two parties have only 38% of the national vote, vis-a-vis something like 47% in the last general elections. That's a massive drop. There are a lot of presidential polls which ask different questions, but I'll just share with you my conclusion. In horse races which pits Erdogan either against CHP candidates Ankara Mayor Mr. Mansur Yavaş or Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, he doesn't win in the first round. And in the second round, one would assume the voters of the smaller candidates will migrate to the opposition candidate. So Erdogan is not doing too well. The problems of him and his party are compounded by a lot of disasters, the first of which is, of course, economic malaise. Turkey is suffering from massive poverty. It's probably one of the very few countries in the world which reports rising dollar GDP per capita continuously since the pandemic, but the lower 40% of the income ladder becomes poorer by the day. So Turkey is the country where trickle-down theory doesn't work. I'll get into it in a different video about Turkish economics, but in particular, housewives who manage the house budget and Erdogan's most dedicated constituency, the retirees, are extremely mad at him and are either becoming independents or switching to opposition parties. Two, this is really unbelievable. It's a disaster of biblical proportions. Because of neglect, a fire in an aging hotel in a ski resort burned alive 74 people in the first month of the year. Later revelations indicated that there were no, fire protection measures in the hotel. There are allegations that the hotel management simply bought the inspectors. Not an unusual story, though this is obviously a claim that needs to be verified by independent sources. Two, bootleg liquor killed 110 people over the last month. 110 people. This is, poisonous alcohol. I always get confused whether it's ethyl alcohol or methyl alcohol that you should drink. One of them makes you blind and gives you liver failure, but it is the bad kind. Why? Simply because Mr. Erdogan's main revenue sources is taxing alcoholic beverages and cigarettes, not because these are lucrative tax harvests, but simply because he believes good Muslims don't drink or smoke. So it's this personal capricious policy that's leading to massive deaths. And even though polls don't show it, most Turks are casual tipplers. They have a couple of drinks every night, which have become unachievable with even middle class incomes. So this entire crackdown or witch hunt is just to hide these ugly realities and divert attention from them. I think it will soon end, simply because, as I've said, the main objective of Erdogan and his nationalist ally, MHP, is somehow find a way to end Erdogan's lame duck status. There are two escape clauses. The first is a new constitution or a constitutional amendment. It doesn't make a difference. According to electoral law precedent, if the constitution is changed, the incumbent automatically gets another term. Two, an early election called not by the president, which has the authority to do so, but by the Grand Assembly, Turkey's parliament. The problem is Erdogan doesn't have the votes to bring about either outcome. He and his nationalist ally have only 325 votes, and the least votes that's needed to enact either of these legislative changes is 360. Of course, given the rather loose and low principles of Turkish politicians, surprise, surprise, it's possible to draft 35 loose deputies, Congress people, who are independents or from other parties to achieve that majority, but that's very expensive, even for Erdogan. And once you work with turncoats, you are never uh, certain of their loyalty. They may promise to vote for your re-election, but then change their mind in the last second when they receive a better offer from another party. So why not early elections? Very simple. All he has to do is talk to the main opposition party, CHP, to agree on an election date that's acceptable to both. AKP, its ally MHP, and the main opposition party, CHP, has oodles of votes. They can legislate an early election just one simple floor vote. But the key phrase here is at a date that's acceptable to both, which doesn't exist because the leader of the main opposition party, Mr. Özel, has set a firm deadline of November 2025, after which his party will not vote for early elections. And clearly, Mr. Erdogan doesn't want to sacrifice a half of his current term to contest an election, which, as I mentioned in the previous minutes, polls show that he's likely to lose. So he's trying the constitutional route, where his potential partner will be the pro-Kurdish rights Dem party. But that's a very convoluted route because we have half a dozen polls which show the majority, ethnic Turks, are dead set against dealing with them, which they see as a front for terror organization PKK, which is fair. It is. Like IRA was, or Sinn Féin was IRA's front. You need those uh, if Kurds have somehow need to convey their wishes to the political system. There is no other representative. Nevertheless, if Mr. Erdogan were to directly invite Dem party to a new constitutional uh, discussion, he will be boycotted by his constituency. So he's going about it by trying to convince former PKK leader, currently in prison, Abdullah Öcalan, to urge PKK and its Syrian affiliate, Syrian Democratic Forces, to lay down their arms or, if possible, to disband themselves, which is possible. In the next section, I'll tell you the Syria file, but developments there make it very unlikely for the Kurdish Syrian Democratic Forces to exist as they have been in the last 10 years with virtual autonomy. And the new Syrian president and strongman, Mr. Ahmad al-Shara, or Shara, doesn't want a Kurdish autonomous region. I am fairly optimistic, for reasons I shall explain to you in a few minutes, that Syrian Democratic Forces will be compelled to lay down their arms and to merge into the central Syrian government. Then, presumably, the resistance of ethnic Turks to any deal with Dem party will evaporate because the terror threat will be eliminated. And Mr. Erdogan will, with the aid of his party, MHP, and the Kurds, draft a new constitution. Voila, Bob is your uncle. He's eligible again. The problem is ending terror or making peace with PKK, whatever, doesn't cover Kurds' demands for a new constitution. They want more local power. They want an official amendment recognizing them as a constituent nation of the Turkish Republic, which is not Turkish. It has several minorities, as well as other things like the release of their thousands of prisoners led by, again, their former leader, Mr. Selahattin Demirtas, one of the most charismatic politicians in Turkey. So this is a dead end. I mean, yes, PKK may disappear. Syrian Kurds may be integrated into the central government. Turkish voters may say, "Oh, fine, yeah, why don't you just go ahead and negotiate with them?" But the Kurdish demands for equal citizenship and the way it's phrased, along with more local autonomy, is anathema to ethnic Turks. So this is a dead end, which brings me to my conclusion that either Erdogan will invest into a constitutional process that will last at least 2 years, facing early retirement, which just doesn't, knowing Erdogan, he likes to tie his ship very closely to the harbor, is not very plausible. Thus, he will have to negotiate with main opposition leader Özel for early elections. Özel says November 2025 is my deadline, but I believe he can be persuaded to postpone that to the first quarter of 2026, by which time Turkish economy will not be visibly better, but somehow better. Now let's go to Syria. If Hayat Tahrir al-Sham gains control over entire Syria and renounces its fundamentalist and pro-Sharia views, it is a huge windfall for Turkey. It is estimated that reconstruction in Syria will cost anywhere between $250 billion to $450 billion. And most of these construction tenders will go to Turkish industrialists simply because we're the only country in the region with the capacity to provide the construction materials and the human power to provide, consulting services, planning, engineering, etc., etc. So, Turkish exports to Syria are only $2 billion last year. This year, Turkish businesses expected to rise to $6 billion, which is not bad, but imagine, in a few years, Turkey could be exporting $20, $30 billion to Syria. I think this will be the end game, but it will take a couple of years. Simply because the Assad regime has brutalized and traumatized the entire population. There will have to be a very bloody account settling between those who supported Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and those construed as agents of the former regime. This unfortunately happens, and it has already started. Sunni militia are raiding Alawite villages and killing or abducting people. And then, of course, there is the issue of Syrian Kurds who still insist on having regional autonomy. But I think at the end, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham will persevere simply because the leader Al-Shara is a former fundamentalist, but he's a very pragmatic guy. He has already changed a lot, ticks the right boxes, says the right things. His ministers are more Western oriented, but as importantly, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is actually the apex of a very wide coalition of different militia, most of which are not fundamentalists. Syria, under Assad, was one of the most secular Arab countries, and the militia retained those characteristics. Finally, these civil wars don't last unless there's a foreign paymaster. In this case, the previous paymasters, Iran and Russia, are out of the game. and United States, definitely, whether it pulls out its troops from Syria or not, supports a centralized, peaceful Syria. So at the end, Tahrir al-Sham will win. In the short term for Turkey, of course, eliminating the perceived Kurdish terror threat is of paramount interest. Um, According to American sources, Trump ordered CENTCOM to make plans for withdrawal from Syria within 30 to 90 days, which doesn't mean he has made up his mind, and he says so. But there is good reason to believe that Trump believes in Erdogan's promise of taking over the Syrian Kurds' main task as far as America is concerned, which is fighting ISIS and taking command of ISIS prison facilities and a sprawling refugee camp harboring roughly 40,000 people who are mostly ISIS relatives or non-violent former ISIS functionaries. Two, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham doesn't want a Kurdish autonomous region. Kurds, even in their autonomous region, are not a majority. That's the saddest thing about Kurds. While they have military and administrative control, their population is largely Turkmenis and Arabs. So there will be riots if they don't surrender. They are still resisting, but I believe if and when Trump orders the withdrawal of American troops, Syrian democratic forces will give up and will accept whatever terms Hayat Tahrir al-Sham offers them. If not, wow, Turkey has a large military and an air force, which Syrian Kurds don't. Neither do they have the drone and missile technology that the Ukrainians possess, which allows them to resist the Russian aggression. They'll be steamrolled or bulldozed, and then, the Sunni Arab militia will attack them. So I think one of the main obstacles to unity and stability in Syria will be eliminated in a couple of months, which will then allow Mr. Erdogan declare the terror threat over and start working on a new constitution. So all in all, like this is why I think, peace abroad, things are doing well uh, for Turkey. Um, you may have noticed that despite Trump's really silly plan to turn Gaza into an American mandate, Erdogan didn't really talk about it simply because he doesn't want to annoy Erdogan. But peace in Middle East and peace in Ukraine under any conditions is good for Turkey from a trade and reconstruction purpose. This is already into its second hour, so I'm going to cut it short. Finally, what to do with Trump? Trump has called Erdogan my friend twice since his election. And yeah, they do talk to each other. The new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has been engaged by our Foreign Minister, Mr. Hakan Fidan, who's a very clever politician and a rather pragmatic guy. The most immediate obstacle to better Erdogan-Trump relationship is Syria. Assuming this is eliminated, then trust becomes the driving factor of that relationship. Turkey and United States will never ever agree on everything. Those days have passed. But remember, Erdogan and Putin have many disagreements, one of which was Syria. The other one was what to do with the Armenian-Azerbaijan clashes in Caucasus. But they have learned to manage their differences and to work on economic integration, which has benefited both sides. This is the kind of relationship I expect from Erdogan and Trump. What would be potential benefits? It's really difficult to put them into dollars and cents. But I think the Halkbank case, where the Turkish state lender is still being tried for violating Iran sanctions, can be resolved amicably. That doesn't mean Trump can influence the judiciary, but it is up to the Secretary of Treasury uh, to decide how potential penalties will be implemented, and there a sweetheart deal can be cut. United States has already offered Turkey to turn control of its Russian-made S-400 anti-missile systems to a NATO officer in return for readmission to F-35 jet fighter program. Now that can be easily solved simply because there is trust between Erdogan and Trump. If today a NATO officer silently walks into the main command room and takes the keys away, nobody will hear. And Turkey doesn't have to announce that. Why didn't that happen under Biden administration? Because they never talked to each other. Biden hated Erdogan for right reasons. And Erdogan always suspected Biden of trying to topple him for obvious reasons. So trust matters. And I think, again, can you make an investment theme out of it, or can you say Turkish economy will get better because Erdogan and Trump get along? No, but it hedges against downside scenarios like more Katsa sanctions, Turkey being tried for war crimes in Syria, Halkbank case, etc., etc. Oh, wow. Istanbul Stock Exchange, currently extremely cheap, too cheap to pass. I have read almost a dozen strategy reports by leading Turkish and international investment banks. The year-end forecast for the main index is 14,000 points, whereas BIST now, the main index, BIST now languishes at 10,000 points. So there's a 40% upside. Turkish lira is expected to depreciate against the US dollar by 20% this year, give and take. So that's like 20% dollar returns in an emerging market stock exchange when there is really no interest in emerging market stocks. And finally, real estate. In terms of volume, that's monthly sales, the real estate market is recovering, but the potential for price gains, that is, to make an investment into Turkish real estate and hope it generates a profit, are too early. Um, the earthquake reconstruction is probably ending this year, which will add to the building stock. Two, Erdogan and Mehmet Şimşek are talking up massive urban renewal, strengthening buildings against earthquake risk. And most of the buildings in Turkey can't stand any kind of earthquake. That will also add to the supply. And finally, affordability. I mean, with the current interest rates at central bank policy rate at 45% and only expected to come down very slowly, monthly mortgage rates are simply not affordable for the middle class, which is the main buyer of these properties. And finally, one of the main selling points of Turkish real estate as an investment to Turkish investors was touting up foreign purchases. Indeed, a couple of years ago, in particular at the start of the Ukraine war, foreigners made up 5% of monthly home sales. That ratio has now declined 2% because Turkish houses have priced themselves out of the market. So much so that according to official statistics, Turks invested $2.2 billion in foreign residences last year. So if you want to buy a house in Turkey to live or to vacation, great, but it's not an investment proposal. Wow, I have outdone myself without drinking. See, this is just iced tea. I want to thank you for watching Real Turkey channel. Your extremely interesting comments, whether they like it or not, and promise to be more punctual in my upcoming videos. Have a great week now. This is Atilla Yesilada saying goodbye from his home office in Istanbul.